We went to the dog park this morning, and I went out, got into my van, and my GFX 50S and the 110 millimeter lens was just sitting on my dash, and it had been sitting there overnight.
This podcast is brought to you by Squarespace, and you guys know how much I love Squarespace. In fact, I use it for my own website, adamlerner.net. If you guys want to save 10% on your Squarespace and domain, use the code ADAM at checkout, ADAM, and you'll save 10%. All right, guys, we are back with another episode of the Brooklyn PhotoWorks ISO 320 podcast, and this week we've got another special guest, Giles Clement. Now, Giles is a photographer that I've been following for quite a while on Instagram and finally got a chance to meet here today and have a chat. And like most of these podcasts, we really try to limit our conversations before, during the pre-roll so that we don't, get rid of any nuggets that could happen during the show. So just to give you a little bit of background about Giles' work, what really attracted to me initially about his work is that he does tintype photography, which is, I guess, 100-plus-year-old technology. And not only is he using, and I should say, wet plate photography. So I know I'm going to be corrected on this, but we're gonna take a deep dive into this whole thing because this is a type of photography that I'm absolutely fascinated in. I would absolutely love to learn how to do this. I've been following other photographers that do a similar kind of work, but there was something about your work and your style that really kind of sucked me in, or pulled me in, I should say. And then I saw that you were like photographing artists at the Newport Folk Festival and all these artists that I love, and capturing them in ways that I've never seen these artists been photographed before. So it's not even just that you're using this, antiquated technology, but you're also connecting with your subjects in a really special and magical way, which, for people that aren't familiar with the process, it's not like you just sit there and like hit the shutter and everyone like is like happy and we have a shot there. There's so much that goes into this. There's so much timing that goes into it that a subject has to sit still for sometimes, I think, 2 seconds. I know we're going to get into this. You're going to correct me on all the things that I'm saying incorrectly. But in following your work, I definitely, saw some things there that I'm just like, man, like how the hell did he do that? Look at the eyes, look at that. And then I saw that you also, build a lot of your own gear. So, you're a technician, you're a craftsman, you're a photographer. Obviously, you must be a psychologist at some point to be able to get people to give you the kind of stuff that they're giving you on camera. So without further ado, let's bring you into the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us and welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Adam. It's good to be here and good to finally virtually meet you.
Yeah, definitely. So what is it about wet plate photography that got you into it? Because it is an antiquated process. It's messy. There's chemicals. There's old heavy gear. It's not. There's nothing easy about that. You chose something really challenging and difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I think I do like. I guess I like challenges to some extent. How I got into it, it was a really slow sort of. I didn't just one day start, go from digital over to doing wet plate. But, I found I kind of came into photography in the late 90s, early 2000s, where there was this transfer, between film and going over to digital. So I started with film initially. And then as soon as I went professional, obviously had to change over to digital. Did journalism for a number of years. So I was shooting the cameras that were bleeding edge at that point, like the Canon 1D, which, I forget what it was, I think 4 megapixels or something like that. But got into that and then was working at another newspaper and kind of went down in their basement. And a lot of the papers at the time, this was in, probably 2004 or 5. A lot of them still had like their old darkroom in the basement, and they had their old cameras and closets that just didn't touch. And I kind of went into those closets and found a bunch of old like twin lens reflexes and old Nikons and stuff like that, and kind of dusted them off and started shooting film again while working at the newspaper. And really liked, I think it's like anybody that shoots film. It's like you kind of like the mistakes of it, and kind of like the eccentricities of each camera, and yeah, kind of a more organic look to the images. So I fell in love with that, and then kept working in news for another couple of years, but was shooting more and more film for myself and for my own work. And then that 2008 came along and the recession hit, and nobody was hiring newspaper photographers or any photographers at that point. So I ended up getting the only job I could, which was doing aerial photography. So we're doing it's mostly mapping, so it sounds all romantic and like you're the Red Baron, but really you're just sitting in the back of a plane running a 400-pound Leica that is bolted to the plane, and there's no creativity to it, and it's pretty awful work. But the one positive about that was I had pretty much an unlimited supply of film. You're shooting 9.5-inch roll film, and they come in 250-foot rolls, and anything less than 25 feet we wouldn't go fly with. And so I would have 25-foot long sections of 9-inch film. So I'd cut that down into 8x10, started shooting large format, and the film, and this is a bit of a long story, I guess, but the film had to be hand processed, and it processed really quickly. So I would just dunk each sheet of this film in the developer, and it would process in like 9 seconds. And during that, I was handling it, and I get my fingerprints on it, and kind of got like a really sort of a messed up look to it. And it was something that I really enjoyed. And then that was, the prohibitive part about shooting large format, of course, is the cost of the film, where it's, $5 a sheet or something like that. So that took that away. And so I was shooting a lot of large format. And I think somewhere in that, I started seeing other people that were shooting wet plate collodion, and kind of looked at that. And I was looking at my work, and I'd have a couple of fingerprints, and I looked at their work, and they were having a lot of fingerprints and like way more fuck ups. And I was like, I want to do that. So long story short on that, I ended up drinking too much one night and ordering all the chemicals. And then a week later, I had this big toxic box on my front porch and didn't know what the hell I was doing. So that's kind of how I got into it. The long story of how I got into it.
So, okay. So that's, we could take like an hour just to unpack all that shit, because that's an amazing story.
Sure.
And it's really interesting. I find that some of a lot of the photographers that we have on this show tend to have that journalistic news background. Mm-hmm. It seems that in my thinking is that a lot of folks like yourself that start in that world really learn very quickly, how to be, efficient at their craft. Mm-hmm. And then I think that by doing so, then it liberates you to then take it to, the more artistic areas and mm-hmm. take your time to really figure out what you want to shoot, instead of having to go out and shoot something, knowing that you can do it and you can do it efficiently, in whatever format now, so, but it's interesting that, you went from, because some photographers, when the transition from film to digital occurred, they never looked back at film. In fact, we talked to a lot of them, and they don't want anything to do with it. They keep their film cameras for nostalgia purposes, but they don't want to ever load another roll if they have to,
right?
Because they just associate it with the aggravation. So it's interesting how you went the other way, mm-hmm. and I guess doing the wet plate collodion is like more of a canvas. Mm-hmm. Where you have this opportunity to create something that's a unique one-off piece of artwork. Mm-hmm. Whereas, there's other photographers that, we see that do photography, and then they manipulate it to the point where can resemble that look, but there's something about the pure form. Mm-hmm. And when you got this gigantic box of chemicals, how do you even like, are we talking like Googling? Are you like trying to apprentice people? Like, how do you get this thing started?
Well, there's the way that I did it, which is not a way that I recommend doing it, which was, this was in 2011 or 12, probably 12. And since then, there's a lot more people doing it, and you can kind of look in your city and be like, okay, I hear somebody else that's doing wet plate, and I can ask some questions. There's also a lot more people on Facebook and forums and stuff like that. Back then, there was a couple of people. It seemed like 10 people in the country doing it. I'm sure there were more, but I couldn't find that much information on contemporary people doing it.
Right.
I did find one I was living in Ohio at the time, and I found one professor there, and I emailed her and I was like, hey, I'd really like to learn this. And she said, I'm in Southeast Asia. I'll be back in 3 months. I'd love to teach you. And
Wow.
I'm an impatient bastard. And so I said, fuck that. I'm going to teach myself. So essentially I went online and read like how to mix this stuff and how to make it, and started mixing and making and made a lot of mistakes for a long time. And, I took images. I mean, some of the I think the cool thing about it is that, I remember the first photo that I took of it, and it was like barely an image, but I had like made an image come out of nothing. And so I was like, oh my God, this is fucking cool, and that's the reaction that a lot of, my subjects now get, where it is, magical is overused, but it is pretty amazing to see, chemistry working in such a cool and as uncontrolled as it is, it's still a very, precise combination of things that creates a final, recognizable image, basically. So yeah, I definitely did it the wrong way, and I could have saved myself a lot of time and heartache and money had I found somebody to teach me.
I am fascinated by this, and I know nothing about it, which is a little rare for me.
Yeah.
Because if I'm into something, but this is one thing that I sort of have pumped the brakes on for myself, because I know that I would, like you, just order the chemicals and then be like, okay, now what?
Right.
Can you like just quickly, without too much detail, just walk through the steps a little bit? Mm-hmm. So, because I'm fascinated and on the edge of my eBay right now on my other computer.
So to make a tintype or an ambrotype photo, it's a really simple set of ingredients, and this stuff was invented in 1850. So the folks back then, it was, there was no B&H to run to and no Amazon. So you were, mixing chemicals that probably weren't readily available, but were like, it's basic stuff. It's not like building a CCD chip or something like that. So the base of the photo is either a piece of metal or a piece of glass. And the glass can be clear or black, and the metal usually has a black enamel coating on it. And then there's something called collodion, and collodion is it's essentially gun cotton, which is thinned out with ether and alcohol. So gun cotton is you mix cotton fibers with nitric acid. It liquefies the cotton fibers and makes like this cotton gel essentially. And then so that's what gets poured on the plate to make. So that gives it's basically a substrate. It's something for the silver image to stick to. So when you're mixing the collodion up, you're mixing this thick syrupy gel with ether and alcohol, and that thins that out to the point where you can pour it, because otherwise it's like really heavy. And when you mix that with the alcohol, you add a couple of metal salts in there. So traditionally they use cadmium bromide and ammonium iodide. So it's like two heavy metals. And then, so when I first started, I was doing cadmium bromide and ammonium iodide. Thing with cadmium is it's a wicked carcinogen. So I used that for a couple of years and then switched over to lithium instead. So essentially you mix that collodion gel and you pour that on a plate of metal and you let it slightly dry a little bit. And then the second component is the silver. So the silver nitrate, it comes in a powder form, and then you mix it with distilled water, and that goes into a light tight tank. So there's like a silver, they call it a silver bath. So there's silver nitrate in that. So when you put the plate down into the silver nitrate with the collodion gel on, the silver nitrate reacts with the heavy metals in the collodion. So there's a lithium bromide and ammonium iodide that react with the silver nitrate. And there's actually a chemical reaction that goes on that turns the silver nitrate into silver iodide and silver bromide. And those are very similar, if not the same, as what's in a roll of black and white film. So it's a rudimentary form of black and white film. So the reaction, you dunk it down in the tank there for 3 minutes, and when it's in this dark tank, the reaction takes place, the silver particles turn from being inert into being light sensitive. And then you load it just like you would load a piece of 4x5 film into a plate holder. And that allows you to carry that sensitive piece of material over to your camera, make an exposure on it, and then bring it back to the darkroom. So when you're doing that, as soon as you pour that gel on the plate, it starts to dry. So it depends on the humidity outside and the temperature, but anywhere between like a minute to maybe 5 minutes to take the photo. So you have to bring this whole, wherever you're going to take a photo, you got to take this whole setup with you. So once you've made the exposure on the plate, and the sensitivity is very, very low, but you'll take an exposure on the plate, bring it back in the darkroom, and then in the darkroom you have a developer, and the developer is super basic as well, and it's basically iron sulfate mixed with vinegar. So it's just this super simple developer, and you pour that over the plate. And they usually develop in about 12 seconds is usually that's the time I'm shooting for.
Wow.
So it starts to see a negative image, and you can do this under a pretty bright red light. So it's kind of like working in a darkroom. So you see a negative image show up, and when it looks good, you'll drop that down into a wash bath and wash the developer off of it. And then the final step is just to put it in a fixer. And the fixer is the one thing that I kind of buy off the shelf, and that's Ilford Rapid Fix. And then you fix it, and then that's
the only thing that made sense to me, by the way.
The fixer, yeah.
All right, so there you go, guys. That's the key.
Go to eBay.
This
fixer
wet plate photography. So
breathe it all in, and
that was your master class.
That's when people used to live till they were like 25, right? When they were doing this stuff.
Yeah, I mean they lived longer. So before wet plate, there was daguerreotype, and they were fuming mercury, so they're boiling mercury onto copper plates.
They would just go crazy.
And they'd go crazy, yeah. So there was the whole Mad Hatter thing.
All them with the people making hats. Yep.
Yeah. Well, right here in.
So I just closed my eBay. I just closed the window, and I'm gonna leave.
I'm gonna change your password, Dan.
Just go take a lesson. I learned like very. I was living in this tiny 1-bedroom apartment, and it was awful, and I was developing all these things in my bathtub
and hoovering all these fumes.
Yeah, it wasn't the best idea, and my bathtub ended up like completely black because the silver will stain. I don't have any pants here that have it, but it stains pretty bad, like black. So I had a black bathtub that the ladies were not fond of.
Which is good for heavy metal.
Yes, it's good for heavy metal.
So basically, my rudimentary understanding is that you're basically creating emulsion.
Mm-hmm. Yep, you're creating a light sensitive, super basic film.
So like if you buy Tri-X, the emulsion's already on the film, it's on the celluloid, and basically you're creating emulsion, and you've got literally this little tiny window. So when you travel, like when you were doing stuff at like the folk festival or even wherever the hell you're set up, you've got all this stuff. You've got all these chemicals. You've got all these devices in the baths and the, and whatever. And you've got such a short window of time. But the exposure, because so we haven't even talked about the gear. So you're shooting with you can correct me if I'm wrong. You were shooting, I believe, originally with like an old camera, and then you built your own camera and put an old lens on it. So obviously there's no shutter speed to be set. There's no aperture setting. Everything's fixed. So the only determining factor is how long you open the shutter and how much light you put on your subject.
Yeah, I mean, depending on, I have some lenses that do have apertures that I use that I'll stop down, but there's none of the lenses I use have shutters built into them.
Right.
And none of the lenses, well, so I initially started, and part of my getting into the wet plate stuff was I went to an antique shop and I found this old brass lens that's about, it's pretty big, like probably 10 inches long and big. And I didn't really know what it was, but I was like, this is cool. And it was $60. And so I was like, I'll take it. And it turned out it's an old, the man that made them was named Charles Harrison. It's a CC Harrison. It's like a 12-inch f4 Petzval lens, and it was made. It's probably one of the earlier lenses in the country because it was made in 1849. So it was actually made for daguerreotype, so it predates this whole process. So I found that, and then mounted that up to a CNR 4x5 that I have, and was shooting with that. And so that was my first camera.
And it was a clean lens ish.
Clean-ish, yeah.
Wow.
Not clean by any modern standards. I mean, it's got, it's dented up and it's scratched, and
but the
glass has,
optics.
The optics.
Oh, the glass has haze and scratches on it too.
Which just adds to the whole.
Yeah,
the whole vibe.
Yeah,
I mean, your whole work is just it's people always say it's timeless and
right.
blah whatever. But it really is. I mean,
yeah, and a lot of that is the I mean, certainly some of that I think is the optics that I use, where they kind of bring their own personality to a photograph, which is something I definitely miss about, you go and buy a Canon and an 85 millimeter lens, and your photos are going to look very similar to somebody else's, and they're going to be, anymore. It's like any camera and any lens is really superb. It's hard to fault any of them except
you're
for
nitpicking at that point it's about post-production and how you differentiate yourself from someone else when you're using the same exact gear.
Yeah. And so with this, it's got, I mean, sometimes I just think I'm lazy and I'm like, hey, if I use this old shit, I don't Photoshop anything. I can just let, and I'm terrible.
What's the, so let's just go back. So you take this 170-year-old lens, and you put it on a CNR 4x5.
Mm-hmm.
It's a f4, fixed f4, you said?
Yep. Yeah, there's no aperture in it at all.
And what's the focal length about?
It's about a 300, something like that.
300. So 300 at f4. But since you're large format, I don't know what that equates to in 35
it's like
millimeter.
a Noctilux.
Yeah, I mean that's like razor thin focus.
Yeah, it's got a very, 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 very narrow depth of field for sure. And then it's got an interesting little quirk to it where, because back then they were, making the lenses in a shed in Manhattan, and they didn't have computers, and it doesn't seem like they quite knew what they were doing. But there's a focus shift in it where the human eye sees mostly the green end of the light spectrum, and the Collodion, the film, sees the blue end and into the not infrared, opposite UV end of the light spectrum. And because of that difference, the way that the light waves come in through the lens and hit the focusing screen, your eye sees the green rays primarily, and they hit at one angle, and the lens is not corrected for that. Where modern lenses, all the colors will hit on one point on the sensor or the film, and with this, they're it's like a prism that's not quite corrected, and so they're all hitting at different places. So it took me a while with that lens to actually learn that my eye would see here, but the blue rays would be hitting down here. And so I'll focus with the focusing screen. And then right before I shoot, I'll just move the whole back to the camera forward, like a quarter of an inch. And then that'll actually get a perfect focus.
Wow. So that's your fine tune adjustment.
Yeah. And so you don't really know. I mean, I've shot the lens for 9 years now. And so I've kind of learned it.
I mean, I've seen, so I've looked at so anybody who's listening to this right now, definitely just get right on the Giles Clement website or on his Instagram. So you can follow along and look at the work, because you just have to do it. This is mandatory. And you have to look at Zeiss, your dog. I'm a dog person, and Daniel's a dog
I am as
person.
well.
So yeah, we love
except when they bark during the podcast and I have to click mute every 2 minutes.
Yeah. So I've looked at these photos and I don't see focus issues. I mean, in fact, I see the opposite. I see like incredible focus on the eyes, which is obviously another defining characteristic that really separates this from most of the other things that you see or people try to emulate or, create. So you obviously figured it out, and your equipment, and the limitations, and how to get the most out of it. Because I've seen plenty of people do, large format photography, and the focus tends to be kind of, it's fine. It's not quite 100%, but a lot of your stuff looks pretty damn close, if not spot on, which, is, I mean, I don't think people really fully understand this. Like there's nothing to turn. There's nothing. You're literally just physically moving the camera a certain distance, and that's the only focusing method that you have.
I'm just looking at your music portraits, and what I said 10 minutes ago about there has to be a way I have to do this.
Yeah, me too.
Like I have to do this. And I'm looking at Regina Spektor, or who I believe is Regina Spektor.
Yeah.
You're like, probably.
Well, I don't want to if
you're not looking, he's not looking at this. And we can
no, it's Regina Spektor.
Could be looking at Chris Christopherson, and you just don't know your musicians at all.
Oh shit.
Oh man. I probably don't.
You know what I love? I love the Elvis Costello photo, and how, you know, you got him. That expression is like unfreaking real, and the eyes, the focus on the eyeball through the lens, like that's so magical to me, you know, because it could have been so easy to be close with the focus, but you still got the eyeball. And
it's just there's so much character in everything.
Ridiculous.
About,
look at us. You came on here
anyway. I'm not.
I'm blushing.
We're
blushing,
not here.
please.
No, we're not here to, like, you know, just make you feel really good about yourself. That, I mean, I guess that's part of it.
It's working. I don't know why I go to therapy. I could just come on here.
We'll just make you feel good.
This is free. Fuck.
Right.
But what I love about photography, you're doing, and
the nuance.
Yeah, it's just the subtleties, the imperfections, the moments happen that they're all, most of them are some form of black and white, which is what I love. And there's just so much character and all the work that goes into it. You know, people look at this and like, oh, they put this in, you know, silver effects, and they clicked the tintype, and he did it. It's like,
hit the miniaturization button, and
just spend an hour with the blur tool, and it's all good.
Look, if you know, you know.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, but I've definitely seen people will tag me on Instagram and be like, hey, I did this, like, I saw Giles' work and I can't do it, and I did it in Photoshop. And I'm like, cool. And I've seen some that are like, I'll comment back and I'll be like, I literally thought that was a tintype. You did a really good job.
Do you remember the Hipstamatic, that filter for Instagram where they had the tintype setting? Yeah. That was actually, I mean, it was crap, but it actually did a pretty good job of emulating that look.
Yeah. And I mean, I think there's a lot of people that are kind of purists, and I think I used to be more, where it's like, I'd be annoyed. I'd be like, I'm putting in the work and you guys are just faking it. But I don't know.
But your subjects I think your subjects, when you're putting in the work, appreciate the work and are so much more appreciative and sit better than if you're, walking in with the Sony and ask them to do different things, and no knock on you, Adam.
No, you can definitely, I mean, that was,
learn from the
that
best
was another thing where it's like, I was shooting this stuff because I felt like with the big camera and with the process, I was getting something out of the subject that I wasn't able to with the digital camera. And I don't know
sorry.
Go ahead.
I think people like see that and they're like, oh shit, this dude's serious.
Especially
like,
artists.
This is an artist. Like we're actually doing a real photo here. Like we're not just sitting there like, doing something for my publicist. This is actually something that's a piece of artwork.
Yeah.
And then obviously you show it to them and they're like, I love the reveal photo. Like when you have the artist with the wet plate and the wet plate is translucent. I mean, that even just,
I didn't understand when you said glass. Now it makes sense, but it is. What are you doing Saturday? You want to come to my backyard and set up shop?
Have any of my shit with me. Storage.
What other
Daniel
cameras
will buy it.
What? I'll hawk. You want a kid? I have a 5-year-old son. He's awesome.
Does he know how to wash dishes or walk dogs?
He does not know how to. He knows how to leave the door open so the dogs run out.
Okay.
That's about it.
Starting point. I'll give you like a Minolta 16 millimeter spy camera for that.
I don't want. Yeah, he's worth more than that.
Okay.
What are some of your? When you shoot, you can't always be shooting, tintypes and this type. With the 4x5s. What are some other your go-to cameras that you use?
Yeah, I mean, I think for a number of years that was it. I had my, I've got a Canon setup, but for a number of years, like I was just really focused on that. And I think, at some point it became, probably 4 years ago, I was like, hey, I'd done it a lot, and I was like, I have a bigger creative vision than what I can do with this technology. And I always loved like pushing, and I still do, where it's like, okay, this is known as a type of photography where the person has to sit still for 10 minutes. Like how do I fix that? How do I how do I push that and do something challenging and interesting with it? So I've done, ballet dancers with it, and I've done, skateboarders in the air and moving subjects and kind of like, seeing how I can make it go. But then, there is definitely a limit. And I think, especially in the last couple of years, it's really something that I've been switching over to, where it's like, I don't know, it's a weird thing where you can get known for something, which at this point, like I'm known for doing this one technique, and that's really good, and it can get your name out there, and it can be a good tool. But then also I would have clients who'd, I'd call them up every once in a while and be like, hey, if you got anything coming down, they're like, oh man, we had this thing, but like it wouldn't work with your process. And I was like, whoa, wait, like I can do a lot more than lug around a bunch of gear and take a portrait of somebody. So as far as equipment, to answer your question, right now I have the Fuji GFX setup. So I shoot with that and their lenses, and then I still have my Canons, and then I still have all my film cameras. So I've got a Hasselblad and a Leica and some old Nikons and.
Are some of these music portraits, the
place.
woman with the hat and the buds, was that on some medium format film, or is that?
I'm not sure which one it is, but
I mean, I'm seeing like film borders.
Yeah. So anything with a film border is medium format or
medium format,
35. Yeah.
Looks like some of this stuff was shot with an X-Pan.
Yep. Yeah. So I had I sold that, but I had that, and then I have a wide lux that I use.
Oh, cool.
Still, just
isn't that what Jeff Bridges uses?
Yeah.
I love that stuff that he just.
Yeah.
It's amazing how like social media has like shown us that there's so many more photographers out there we didn't even know were taking pictures.
Yep. Yeah, and that's the cool thing about musicians too. I've shot a lot of musicians, and it's always like, you think of, oh, they're a musician and that's it, but then you get to know them, and they're also amazing painters, or they're artists before they are
multidisciplinary
performers. Yeah, and I love photographing people like that, or people that have their own creative vision.
Well, Daniel and I were both professional touring musicians before.
Oh, really?
Did photography. Yeah.
Well, that's actually my question. Have you gone to festivals and sort of, when my band would play different festivals, there would always be a photographer in a tent, whether it's Danny Clinch or whoever.
Yep.
Have you done that?
Yeah, I've done that. So I did that with the Newport Folk Festival for 4 years. So they'd give me a studio in their backstage area. So I did it at that festival. I've done it down at South by Southwest, and then I did it for a couple of years out at Willie Nelson's ranch. He does this little luck reunion every year. So I did there for a couple of years.
So who's that hat? There's the hat maker that blanking on his name. Him and his wife go down there to his ranch every year as well. He has the hat shop in New York. But
I don't know.
He was always talking about how awesome that was.
Yeah. So I've done that, and I did a Shaky Knees festival down in Atlanta.
And how do you digitize them?
With the smaller, so 4x5 and 8x10, I have an Epson scanner, so I just scan those in. And then with the big glass photos, those are 16x20, and so those I hang them up in the studio and shoot them with a medium format back. And that seems to, I've blown them up to 40 inches by 50 inches, and it holds together very well. So
yeah,
there's a lot of detail in there.
Do you make reproductions of the plates?
Yeah, I do. Limited prints of most of the musicians that I've photographed. So those are on my website. And then some of my landscapes and stuff are on my website.
That's cool. Yeah, I see a lot
it's like Admire just like glazing off into your world on our computer.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, I like the prints look cool. Look really nice.
Thanks.
So you're kind of a gypsy. You seem to be traveling a lot, and is that I noticed that you recently did a COVID series, and I actually connected you with a friend of mine.
Yeah. Yep.
Which is just amazing that not only did you guys connect, but you actually photographed her, and it came out great. So you were able to do a collaboration with another artist, which connects us as well a few degrees.
Yep.
So that's really cool. So what kind of, I mean, I guess maybe just, you're probably somebody that just can't sit still. So you probably just thought to yourself, hey, there's a lot of artists that are idle right now. I'm idle. So if I go to them, tell us more about that.
Yeah, I think, I mean, you know, in the last few years, I've been on a whole sort of like a personal journey to find out what my, you know, what I'm doing. And I think I've, you know, I sort of assumed that I was alone in that as an artist, where I'm like, you know, I'm creating work and it's going out into the world, and what's it doing, and woe is me, and you know, all that existential mind fuckery. And so I've been going through a lot of that, and I had, you know, I had a studio down in Nashville for 5 years and closed that down last year. And I'm just, you know, I'm in kind of an interesting place where I'm kind of trying to figure out what, you know, what I'm doing, and also finding ways that if I am taking on a project or working on something or creating images or telling stories, that I want to tell those in the best possible way. And not only for my viewers, but also for myself, where it's like, I want to invest myself in these stories more. And I think, you know, when I down in Nashville, I was kind of losing a bit of that, and you know, it felt repetitive, and I was just doing the thing. So I've been kind of sort of gypsying for the last, you know, since the fall. So I spent the winter up in Vermont with a buddy of mine, and just kind of, I didn't really take any photos for most of the winter, and just kind of you know, I've been, not to get too personal, but, you know, doing therapy and dealing with you know, my childhood, which I hadn't really dealt with, and all that. So just kind of, yeah, I'm in an interesting space, and also, you know, I think that gives me the ability to kind of you know, throw out the schedule a little bit and just kind of relax and find my own voice in a project that I'm going to create before I run into it. I think as a creative person, I think a lot of people have this, where it's like you get onto something and then you know, you have a lot of drive, and you dig into it really hard, and you go into it, and this may only be me, but, you know, you get 6 months into the project and you're like, shit, what's the point of this? So I think I've been working on, and this is a long-winded answer to that, but but I think I've been working on I think it's like, you know, finding purpose and finding meaning in my work, and that was part of the series I did on artists during the pandemic, where, you know, that hit, and I was, you know, I went from having a pretty busy summer schedule to suddenly nothing, and that's kind of like, you know, I don't have to tell you guys, but that's kind of like a kick in the teeth, and you're like,
now
what the fuck? Yeah, because this really, I mean, this a little bit like in 2008, this happened with creatives too, where, you know, working professional creatives, like, you're always the first one to get kicked out of the budget. But this was like that times 20, and I was feeling very unhinged and unstrung, and I guess sort of selfishly, I wanted to know, you know, how are my fellow artists doing with this? And so I started, I didn't really make a plan. I just kind of, I've got a van with a bed in it, you know, a little thing built out for touring, and kind of just got into that and started heading down the East Coast and meeting artists and photographing them and finding out a little bit. You know, I had each one write a couple of paragraphs about, you know, who they are and how they're coping, kind of thing. And then with each one, I just said, hey, do you happen to know another artist I could photograph? And so I kind of just leapfrogged down the coast, and did that for a month and a half. My dog and I just lived in the van and self-isolated on the road, and ate a lot of canned soup and, you know, all that stuff. And we're very sad that there were no open coffee shops, but I have a French press and a stove.
Yeah,
so.
that's the
yeah.
coffee. There's liquid gold.
Yeah.
Well, look, man, that's an incredible answer, and a lot of stuff going on there. And I think that it's pretty natural for artists to be reflective. And I don't think there's anything unusual about being 6 months into a project and being like, it's like that, like, to put it simply, it's like sometimes you walk into a room and you're like, why did I come in here?
Yep.
Even though you walked in there with purpose. I think the same thing can happen in a project, that you can get to a point where it's like, okay, now I'm kind of here. Is this worth it? Is it meaningful? Am I going somewhere with it? Do I really want to continue to pursue it? I think that that's perfectly normal.
Mhm.
And especially as a photographer, you're a lone gunman. You're not collaborating with people in the pursuit of moving things forward for yourself personally. You collaborate obviously when you're in a photo shoot, but
Mhm.
on your own, the only driving force is yourself. And if there's
Yep.
impediments in there, like, you were saying, like things from your childhood and things like that, that can obviously, or at times, get in the way. So you can be at a point creatively where all of a sudden, like, you have that existential moment. You're like, why am I doing this?
Mhm.
Why even bother?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then
So I
sometimes you
think
pick
that,
it up a year, 2 years down the line. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah,
at least I've had projects that have been at bay for a while,
Yeah.
and you get re-inspired.
Mhm.
Sometimes you can't force inspiration,
yeah,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. And one thing I also found was, because I've been asking these questions for a while now, and it kind of, the COVID thing sort of crystallized a lot of them, where I, you can wonder what the grand purpose of everything is, and at the end of the day, there is no grand purpose to anything. We're all going to be dead in a matter of time, and not to get dark, but like what I've kind of been working on personally is just like, with the COVID series, it could be like, why am I taking these photos of the artists, and what greater purpose? And it's always, I'm always like, oh, I need to get them published in the New York Times, and it's illusions of grandeur and all this stuff. But with this one, I was just like, you know what? And a lot of friends helped me with this, where it's like, you know what? I'm going to go out. I'm going to meet these people. I really enjoy meeting somebody and learning about them. I really enjoy the process of taking a photo. And for this project, that's going to be enough for me, and that is the purpose. There's no greater purpose than that. And being okay with that, I think, is something that I'm trying really hard to learn to do better. Is just like,
take it for
and
what
then,
it is.
yeah, take it for what it is. And then if it goes on and something else happens with it, that's awesome. But
That's what we call the trigger.
yeah, and a lot of that stuff is out of your control anyway. So it doesn't help to, I can come up with an idea and then in 5 seconds shoot it down and say, oh, this is no good because it's not good. I'm not going to get a front page story out of this. So fuck it. I'm not even going to try. Or you can just do it and accept that doing it is cathartic for me. It feels good. The artist gets a cool print of themselves at the end of it. And I think that I'm able to give them something, and not only the photograph, but also I'll sit around and chat with them for a couple hours and see how they're doing and let them know how I'm doing, and so it's
Yeah, it's great. I mean, I honestly, there's a lot of parallels with this podcast because Daniel and I, we started this from nothing,
yeah,
and we started it literally when shit went down.
yeah,
And the amazing thing is that it's given us the platform to be able to have conversations with artists that we didn't formally know.
yeah, yeah,
And that's been incredible. And we also went about this without thinking about some greater purpose and like, oh, we have to do this and we have to get sponsorships and we have to, I mean, the idea is like, if we build it, hopefully they will come.
mhm,
We'll get something out of it. It keeps us busy. It keeps us motivated, keeps us engaged. So I
yeah,
get that, and if this is a trigger that leads us somewhere else, then so be it.
mhm,
But for now we're doing it, and we're
yeah,
doing it because, so
I mean, it's kind of selfish.
yeah.
It's inspirational
sure,
for us. At a point when I had, like, besides family aside, taking care of my kids, I
mhm,
didn't have anything else at the moment. I
right,
had no work. Work was being I'm shooting weddings. Work was being canceled, pushed
yep,
to 2021,
yep,
and I'm not. I needed some form of inspiration and talking to different photographers, and even talking. Obviously talking to Adam, but we wanted to sort of expand. Um, that was the beginning of, why don't we just record this, our
yeah,
conversation, then inviting other photographers to weigh in, especially during this time. Everyone's been so open
mhm,
and um available and easy to chat with.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think
It's
it's
helped
real. I
me
think
out a
it's
ton.
powerful to. I mean, and not only during this, but I think generally something that I was starting to work on before the pandemic, but sort of I think a lot of us, especially as professional photo people, and I'm sure it applies to other artists, but there's this thing where you got to put on this brave face, and people ask how you are, and you're like, you're always fine. You always have lots of work. You tell them all this stuff, and half of it is like somewhat true, but not always, you're like, I'm doing this thing with whoever the fuck it is, and it turns out you're like walking the dog for somebody that owns a network, instead of actually doing a story for them. But I guess not that I've ever done that, but it's like the,
no, never.
I wish, man. I love dogs, but I think like putting on this like brave armor where it's like everything's fine. I think that's important to do perhaps for the client, but I think as creatives we need to be a lot more vulnerable with everybody, but especially with other people that are in our situation where it's like, I mean, before the pandemic, a few months before the pandemic, I ran down to Philadelphia. I just, I was up in Vermont. I just took the day and went down and just sat down with a couple of my friends and just said, hey, like, this is where I'm at. Like, I'm feeling pretty lost, and I don't know what I'm doing, and what do you guys think? And just to be able to do that, I think is really important, to kind of check in with other people and admit that you don't have all your shit together, because then you find out, I mean, one of my friends down there, he's been shooting for, 20 years longer than I have. And he's like, you know what? I don't have my shit together either,
Yeah, these
and that's
photographers
okay.
that you've admired that have been at the top of their game, they're in the same position.
Yeah.
They're like, am I ever going to shoot again?
Right.
What's that going to be like?
And when am I going to shoot again? I don't even know if I can or want to.
Yeah.
So it's put everyone in a sort of vulnerable, and, to be jobless, I think, is probably the most vulnerable situation to be in.
Yep.
To say, I don't have work.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah. But, look, it's good that we have at least a platform to share, and connect with people. Looking at the pandemic work, the pandemic series that you did, the one thing I'm just curious about, and we don't have to take too deep a dive in it, but you definitely made a choice as to how you edited these photos, and it's cool. You kind of, in my view, you kind of gave them a little bit of like a, an analog vibe, but you also kind of left them a little desaturated and kind of dark. And I just, obviously these are artistic choices, but I think it kind of speaks to the vibe of what the whole series is about. It just, I don't know if you did this consciously at first or if this was conscious, but it works, and it really is such a departure from a lot of the other stuff that you've shot. So maybe it is one of those kind of, experiences where you're kind of moving towards something, and this kind of is the placeholder in this little frame of time while you're kind of figuring things out.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one of the initial ideas with that project was, it was when the pandemic was still kind of like in an old folks home in Seattle and not very serious, but they were talking about doing lockdowns, and I was like, I want to do a project on this. And so my initial idea was to get the biggest telephoto lens I could possibly find and do a series of like socially distanced portraits and kind of see how, a lot of my work is somewhat intimate, where I'm like pretty close to my subject. If I got a big lens, I'd be very far away from my subject, and just kind of feel how that felt for me and what that brought out in my subjects. So I ended up talking to lens rentals down in Tennessee, and they sent me up a Sony 600 and a A7R4 to do the project with. And I got that and took one photo with it. And it's an amazing piece of kit. And I pretty much immediately was like, this, I think also like when I came up with the idea, it was still sort of, it hadn't affected me personally yet. And then by the time I started the project, it definitely had, and it felt, I had friends that had become sick, and I hadn't touched another person in a month and a half or something like that. And so it, my approach to the project and my approach to the idea had shifted a lot between the idea and between taking it to the, into putting it into action. And so I think, as much as I would have liked to continue to use that setup and shoot that and see what that would look like, it just didn't feel good to me anymore. And I wanted to be closer to my subjects, and I wanted to, or to people in general. And so so I switched over and just started shooting with my own camera and kind of, went from isolating people with distance to isolating people with light. So all those portraits are shot, in daylight with outdoor strobes. And I'm kind of, I kind of wanted to, especially with some of the performers, because I photographed, like dancers and stuff like that, where I kind of wanted to give them a little bit of a stage that they were working on when I was taking their photographs. So that, and the desaturation, I just did it and kind of ran with it. I'm partly colorblind, so I have a really hard time editing color photos. So that's part of it, because if I desaturate, then I can't.
Well, that's the other thing that I thought was interesting, is that you chose to go color.
Yeah. Well, I think, I don't know. I mean, I've wanted to explore more with color. I mean, I like black and white, but I also think that, I've done that a lot, and my whole portfolio is black and white. And I do think that, I mean, also part of it was like, I wanted to learn, I want to learn how to shoot color better. And I want to learn how to, the lighting people outdoors.
Right.
I've definitely done that, but not as many times in a row as this was. So I was learning my gear a bit and doing that. So
that's cool, man. Thanks. I like it. So just crushing that ambient light and just creating your own mood, your own vibe.
Yeah. And I really like, awesome. I like isolating. I kind of like, giving, I don't know. And I've been thinking about that, with the current protest movement, maybe doing a series like that, where I'm bringing studio lights into a city environment and kind of, because you see so many photos of protesters, and it's all very emotional and very, I don't know. I kind of feel like a lot of the photos I'm seeing, it's not very personal, whereas like here's another person who's grieving and is angry and is voicing themselves, but they're in a big crowd of other people. And I think it's somewhat easy to forget about that person. And so I've been thinking and talking with friends about, figuring out some way of really like highlighting a person and finding out about them as a person, not just about them as somebody who is,
like telling their stories, angry. Like you've been
doing. Yeah. And giving, like putting a story behind a face kind of thing. So so I think that's another idea I'm kind of working on.
That's the photojournalist side of you that you can't shake.
Yeah. I mean, I still love journalism, and I've done a little bit of editorial stuff for car magazines and stuff recently, but
that's cool.
Otherwise, it just, I mean, and most of it is like, it doesn't pay for shit. So I'm just like, people will editors call me and be like, do you want to do this project? And I'm like, if it's cool enough, yes. Because I know you're not going to pay me shit. But if I don't want to do it, I don't want to do it.
Right.
So, it's never.
You said you had film like is that when you shoot 35 millimeter, Rich? I don't see you shooting much, but is that your choice?
I've got an M2 that I shoot with, so I've had that. I don't know, probably 15 years. That camera, just I'll never sell it. And I think like, I don't know, I've never been like a huge gearhead, and I think cameras are amazing, especially the older ones, where it's like they can make something so precise with, rudimentary tools, essentially back in the 40s and 50s.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I always, people are like, what do you think about your Leica? And I'm like, every photographer should own a Leica, because then you can't blame your tool, kind of thing. It's like, because as a kid, I kind of got into photography because I read Robert Capa's biography, the old World War II photographer, and he shot with Leicas. And so I was like, I have to have a Leica, and it took me years before I still got a total steal on it. But years before I could afford it. And then I got it, and I was like, I mean, the photos, are they that much better? They're not that much better. And the one thing that I love about it is shooting it. So it's more like a selfish and a personal thing for me, where it's like, it winds really smoothly. Looking through the viewfinder is awesome. It's a beautiful piece of equipment. But, I think everybody should own a Leica, because then you can move the fuck on and get back
to
it
out of your system.
Pictures. Yeah, and not.
I'm still waiting for that.
That feeling to come.
I'm still waiting for that moment.
To get a Leica. Do you have a Leica?
Yeah, that's pretty much all I shoot.
Okay.
At the moment, I've had all different types of Nikons and Sonys, and Fujis, the GFX, and but Leicas have always been a constant.
Yeah.
And I've just sort of, but a lot of it, and we've talked about this a lot of it is the process. It's not necessarily the end result, but it's how you get that result.
Yeah.
And for me, the rangefinder, the manually focusing,
just slowing down.
It makes me a better photographer. But
Yeah,
I'm shooting.
you
I
see
like shooting
a lot more.
Yeah.
I learned on digital. And so I've, in the last year and a half or so, I've sort of stepped back and taken a lot more film, and I'm developing myself.
Yeah.
And scanning, and that whole process is just what makes me love photography. And this last week and a half or 2 weeks, I really haven't taken any photos.
Yeah.
And I miss it, and I feel so bad. I'm doing some work in the house. I mean, my cameras aren't on my dining room table anymore, and I need to say, even if it's not in front of me, I need to feel inspired to go into like 10 feet away and just take it out and shoot. And then when I have a few moments alone, I go down in my basement and I develop it. I also have a Rolly that I shoot the 120 on. And it's that same feeling of, I could imagine when you're making your photos, you dip it in for 12 seconds and it comes out. It's the same thing as when I'm not making prints at my house yet, but when I look at the negative after the rinse is on, and I'm like, oh, there's a fucking image on there.
Yeah.
Like, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Because I've fucked up so many times.
Yeah. No, it's a cool feeling. And I guess my point with the gear is I feel like a lot of people get hung up on the latest and greatest and the hype behind a lot of the stuff. And really, it's like you can
make a good image with almost anything.
Yeah, pretty much anything.
I mean, when you're making those images on antiquated equipment, I mean, whether it's from the 50s or from 1850, I mean, it's the person taking the photo at the end of the day, and the equipment is the special
sauce.
I hate that word, but you always use it, so it's the special sauce.
Special soup.
Soup is it's the soup.
Special.
It's the stew.
Meringue.
Gravy.
Ugh. That's not very good.
That's a horrible thing.
It's like those,
do you think you're gonna do the wet plate stuff again, or is that just kind of like on hold for now while you're kind of figuring stuff out?
I'll definitely do it again. I think certainly not as much as I was. For 2 years, the dog and I were living in a van, and we were touring full time, and I was renting out studios in cities across the country, or setting up in shops and stuff, and doing portraits.
The dog basically said no more.
Yeah, he's 10, and he doesn't like traveling that much anymore, so he's done with it. And then, I kind of, and I've talked to some other friends too that have done the wet plate work for similar amounts of time, and they're kind of the same thing, where it's like, I've done this portrait a lot, I've done and like, what else can we kind of do? And I think it's one of those things where it's like, it's always something that I'll have in my arsenal. And with the, when I started doing the big glass ones, I guess probably 5 years ago, and when I started doing those, I hit the point with the smaller tin types where I'm like, I'm pretty done with this. Like I've done this a lot. I don't, and then that kind of reinvigorated me doing the big things. That was like a whole new, like, holy shit, this is amazing that I managed to pull this off. So that kept me going for a number of years, 4 or 5 years with the big stuff. But, and I still want to keep doing those, but it's not where it's something that I want to do when it fits,
Right.
And I think it's not something I want to do every day. And I don't want that to be my only trick kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I, like I said before, I have, a wider vision where it's like, I want to be able to capture things that I'm simply not able to capture with a dark room and 1,000 pounds of equipment and 3 assistants and lights and all this shit,
Right.
So it's like, and it's been really freeing, like with that COVID project, where I can roll up to somebody's house and I have one Pelican case and I set up in 5 minutes and I take their photo, and then I can just chat with them for the rest of the time and bug out, and whereas
That's
before
awesome.
it would be like an all day event. So it's really freeing, and I'm really kind of relishing that ability to move as quickly as I can now. So, but no, I'm certainly not going to give it up. I still can get something that I can't with digital.
Yeah, sure. But you don't want to, like you said, you don't want to be defined by that, but it doesn't hurt to have had the recognition from doing so.
Yeah, no, not at all. And it's something where it's like, I mean, I was working with the tintype process for 2 years before I got a lucky break. And, my first bigger gig was down at Willie Nelson's ranch and shot down there. And then somebody else saw me from there and kind of built off of that. But yeah, you can, I don't know. I mean, I think that's something that if there's younger photographers that watch this, something that I would say is like, there's no secret to, I wouldn't call it success because I don't consider myself successful, but there's no secret to getting to achieving what you want to achieve other than kind of like sticking it out. Also being willing to say, hey, this isn't working for me and take a turn in course. But then the other thing is just waiting for luck, essentially, because I think if you talk to most people that have kind of like, not including myself, but that have made it, it's like somebody happened to see them and that kind of boosted them into the next level. And so I think like having the grit to stick it out until you get lucky is important.
Yeah.
So.
I think one of my biggest takeaways from this chatting with you is embracing imperfections.
Mm-hmm.
And even down to, and not to like poke, but even down to your scans. Mm-hmm. I mean, your images speak for themselves over something that someone can spend 4 hours on. I mean, you can spend 4 hours on a scan mm-hmm. and take all that shit away, mm-hmm. But each image has something and it doesn't matter. It's inspiring. It really, when I'm scanning, I can get lost and be like, oh, fuck, this is, and you are always comparing it to digital and how clean that is. And that's mm-hmm. the problem. It's so clean.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not talking about dust, but there's like, if there's like a line, I mean, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. No, I really like that. And I kind of credit one of the guys that got me into film photography was this old, I should call him old because he might watch this, but not going to say senior either. Shit.
A beautiful gentleman.
A gentleman.
An experienced man.
An experienced photographer. Yeah, he owned a little camera shop out in Ohio, and he kind of helped me learn film developing and stuff. And I would, I was asking him like, oh, like how long do I develop this Tri-X? And he'd be like, oh, he just like put a roll in, and then he'd go like make a cup of coffee, and then he'd come back and stir it, and then like pour his coffee, and then go fix it. There was no timing at all. It was just like, and I like that approach.
How did that work out for you the first couple of times?
I mean, that's the thing. It's like I always like it, even when when I'm developing film. I think it's that ability to be surprised that I still enjoy. If with a digital camera, I know what I'm going to get. Like 90%, especially now with like the what do you call it? The mirrorless stuff. It's like you can see your photo before you even push the button. And I think that's amazing. And that was one thing, like I borrowed that Sony, and that thing is just insane how much it does for you. And but I was also, using it and also using the GFX or any mirrorless. It's like, there's something that I miss about being able to look through an optical viewfinder. And there's certain moments, like when I was doing this project where I was like, I would take an image and I would get the image at the end of it and it looked great, but I missed that. I wasn't personally there. I was looking through onto a computer screen when I was taking this photo. And I kind of missed that with a Leica or with a, even an SLR, where it's like, I'm personally, I want to witness that moment because I can't get that moment back no matter how good the photo is. It's like, I kind of want that fraction of a second to keep for myself.
Well, you you end up having a lot less misses when you shoot with a mirrorless that has.
Oh yeah, they're insane.
IAF and IGES and all that other stuff.
Yeah, no, I can't believe how advanced those things have gotten.
Have you tried the GFX 100?
I have, yeah. I have the 50 because I just don't need 100, but
Right. I
but
mean,
the
the
100
100,
is improved.
I borrowed it for a little while, and it was incredible. And I think honestly, I think that the 100 is the best of the lot.
Yeah,
I think the
definitely.
files look the best. Even if you can just put aside the file size, I think the actual files themselves are the most robust, the most malleable, that have the most latitude. And actually, to me, they have the best flavor. Whereas the 50, I still love the 50, regardless of the body.
It's taken me a long time to get used to that fucking thing.
I think that what I don't like about the 50 is that it's so painfully slow.
Yep.
And the focus is so temperamental.
Yep.
But I think the files are fine, and I think they're beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
If they could take the technology from the 100 and put it in the 50 in a 50 sized body, that to me is the winner.
Yep.
Because
nobody really, I know a few people that need 100, but very few people.
And just hand holding that GFX 100 is just ridiculous. Like I remember I took it, like I did a photo walk in my neighborhood in Manhattan, and I was like, oh, this is just dumb, like it was just, but the stuff that I wanted to grab, I just grabbed it, and it was like incredible. So
yeah, they're getting there. I mean, it's hard to, I've considered a lot switching, getting rid of my Canons and the Fuji and just getting a Sony. But then I don't know. I mean, everybody always goes on about the files and blah, 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 and the magic of medium format. And I don't know. There's definitely, getting even the files out of the A7R4. I don't feel like I was able to do as much with them as I can with the stuff out of the 50. I don't know.
It's a different
there's a little bit more. There's a little more detail in there somehow. And,
well, you know what it is? Because I've shot them both. I feel like the reason why the 50 files are better is because the glass is better.
Yeah.
So
sure.
all of the little kind of the nuances, the micro contrast, all this fine detail, the fine detail, which you don't really know that you're seeing until you actually look at it. That is so much more present in the GFX files. Whereas the Sony, the A7R4, to me, it's probably their best sensor, and the files are the most malleable. The blacks are the nicest blacks. But to me, what lets down that system is always the glass. Especially like from people that like to shoot wide open. I do, you do, Daniel does. I've tried all the different stuff, and it's like, it's never as good. And this is a very hypercritical analysis, and it's unscientific as well. But when you've had both files in front of you in the computer, and you're kind of manipulating them and looking at them and trying to get something out of them, when
I like it. I mean, if I needed to do an assignment for most things, I would, that Sony is going to kick everything else's ass pretty much, as far as I can tell. It's like amazing, and that's
you're allowed to hate it if you want to.
I hate it. I had it. I hate it.
You didn't
have Adam has it, and he hates it. So
no, it's amazing. I just don't. I want a little more like quirkiness.
I have a like-hate relationship with the Sony because
it works every time, and you like it.
It's so brilliant, because I shoot, like, I do automotive stuff, and it just fucking focuses.
And
the files are so dense. Like I had to shoot this thing, and it was like absolute, like middle of the day, midday, sun's overhead, not a cloud in the sky. And the files look good. I mean, it crushed the files, and they look good, and there's detail. But then if you zoom in, you're like, all the chromatic aberration, the fringing, and like all the stuff that to me is the weakness in the lenses. Anyway, we could digress on that for ages. But so my feeling is this: when Fuji offers us, a GFX that's in between the 50 and the 100, that has the IBIS and it has the IAF, I think I would be very much inclined to dump the Sony. Sorry, Sony, and jump back into Fuji. Until that time, there's some stuff that I just, the Sony just does it, and it does it well.
Yep.
So
And if Fuji's listening, the next time you put a camera out, you should actually get a photographer to use it before you put it out.
Oh, you don't want just a reviewer, a blogger?
No. I just think that like with the 50, I mean, I came from the 50 from the Pentax 645 digital, which in many ways felt like a camera that a photographer had used and given the input on. And with the 50, I'm like, what is going on? It doesn't.
You have the R or the S?
I have the S. Okay. And it doesn't, like, the little, everything's small and the diddly and the menu is fucked and it's just awful. And they did that with
clunky.
It's clunky and it doesn't need to be. And if they just, not that I'm volunteering, but if you want to like maybe send out a few pre-production versions and be like, what are you looking for as a photographer?
I could put you in touch.
Okay. I'd volunteer myself and a couple other people and be like, don't put the play button where you can't reach it with one hand. You got to like.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember like,
shit.
Fuji, because I've been a Fuji
now, but
yeah, no, I hear you. I've been a Fuji fanboy since the beginning. I had an X100 like the day it came out, and then every one since, except for the V. I haven't bought that yet.
It's a little expensive.
Yeah. Anyway, so when they were, when the 50, the GFX 50, whatever, the 50S, is that it? Anyway, I remember seeing it for the first time at like Photo Plus, and I was like, really? Like, that's the best you guys can do? Right. And it had that weird bump in the rear, and the buttons were all splashed all over the place, and it was just like shaped like a brick, and the whole thing, like, I was like, is this a prototype? Is it done? And I never gelled with that body.
No. And the new ones, the 100, I don't think is all that much better, honestly.
It's got improvements. Huge.
Yeah, and it's just not good design. I mean, but Fuji's been doing that for years. I think the 100 is sort of an exception to that. But back when they were doing those Nikon, they were using Nikon bodies and Nikon glass to make their own. I forget what it was called.
The S1R or something.
I think it was even before that. They were using like the old N90S to make a digital body, but it looked the same way. Where it's like the sensor was good and the electronics were great. But then they just got to that point and were like, okay, let's put it in a cardboard box and paint it black and stick a sticker on it and hope that somebody uses it or buys it. But it's like they don't go all, I don't have the camera in here, but I feel like they kind of dropped the ball.
I had it for a year and a half.
It's weird.
Yeah.
The 50S.
I tried the 50S. I tried the 50R. I actually like the 50R a lot better.
Yeah.
I like that it's more rangefinder style. I like that it's lighter weight.
Yeah.
I don't miss the D-pad. I know everyone's like crying about the D-pad. I find that that's I like it better personally, but there's really not any difference because it's the same sensor and the same slow processor and the same kind of crappy focusing system. So if you don't have to move fast, you're fine.
Yeah.
So like I said, I still don't have a place for it, even though I would like one. Like, look, if money were not such an object, yeah, I would just have one in my bag for certain things, but not now.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's cool. And look, and they're making some good lenses. I mean, there's some really good lenses, and there's I think there's an 81.7 on the horizon. So it's fun stuff coming down the pike. So all right, so here we are. You're in Brooklyn, if it's okay to say that.
Yep.
You're in Brooklyn. I loved the photo you did at the Rockaways with the black surfing group.
Oh yeah, thanks.
Because one of my best friends is a Rockaway surfer. He's been out there, and I know a few of the guys that have been out there for like the last 15 plus years surfing. They have a surf shack that they've kind of gone in on. I've been out there a few times. I've photographed a few times. I've seen the transition from nothing to like now there's like the taco place and the coffee place, and people are refurbishing homes. But I wasn't aware of this group, and I loved that you not only illuminated me to it, but posted a really nice photo as well. So I mean, look at this, man. You come to New York for like 5 minutes and you're already kind of hanging with like the coolest crowd. So that's pretty sweet. And what's next? You said you might go down to Philly. You might come up to Connecticut to visit me and teach me wet plate.
Well, first he's coming Saturday, right?
Oh yes, that's right.
Yeah, Saturday
I've
we'll do some
cleared
tintypes.
my books. Yeah, I honestly, I don't know what's next. I'm trying to figure it out. And I think like, I don't know, it's a weird time where nothing's really too fixed or solid. And so I'm just at the moment just trying to go, a week at a time sort of, and not stress. I think it's difficult to live like that to some extent,
Right.
but if you can just accept that, a lot of stuff is out of your control, and it's not something I've experienced before, where there's just like, there's not really you can have a hurricane or something like that comes through and fucks you up for a couple of weeks, but there's going to be an end to it. And with this, I think there's less of a sense of that. And so it's harder to kind of put your stake in the ground anywhere.
Right.
So I don't know. I mean,
That's also freeing a little bit. I think that's freeing
yeah, it is. And I think
on the positive side of it.
Yeah, no. And I think you just have to, or for me at least, like I just had to get to the point where it's like, okay, everything's fucked, and that's just how it's going to be. And we're going to, that's the new reality.
Yeah, right.
You can't plan, and you can't, you can spend all day being like, oh, I don't have any work, blah, blah, blah. Everything's so terrible. But after a couple of weeks of that, it's like, okay.
Yeah. You got to push on.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think like I've been wanting to go down to Philly for a while. It seems like a really cool, I got quite a few creative friends down there, and seems very supportive in a way that a lot of cities aren't.
It's a good community.
Yeah. And it's kind of like artists that aren't necessarily commercially successful are supported there as well as people that are. And I think in a lot of cities, like Nashville, for instance, it was like, there's a lot of music there, obviously everybody knows that, but there's a lot of, the music there that's coming out is like commercial music. And that's the drive, is like to make commercial music. And I think something's lost in that, where, if you're no longer supporting the guy that's making music because he really loves it, and you're only supporting the guy that makes something that sells Chevys or gets a Grammy, then you're missing out on a lot of stuff. And I think that's something that I sort of feel in other cities too, where it's like you're losing the art to try to make the commercial success happen. And,
well, New York is like one of the most difficult cities because it's ridiculously expensive and there's too much competition. So
yeah.
Philly, like, Fishtown, Kensington, like more artists, more manageable, more affordable.
Yeah.
So totally makes sense.
Yeah. And more supportive too, where it's like, I feel like in New York, it's like hard scrabble, and, you don't want to help your competition out too much because they'll take you out. And,
right.
And down there, it's like, I feel a little more like give and take, and, willingness to get along with folks. So I don't know, but that's my plan right now, is to go get a small, cheap apartment and maybe a studio and see where it goes.
Sweet. So, that's awesome.
Yeah. No solid plan, but
I know some people down there too. So let me know if you start making that happen.
Yep.
Happy to hook you up, because I know a bunch of photography people down there.
Cool.
With some of them have studios, some of them have personal studios, and probably some good connections to be made.
Yeah. Awesome.
Well, look, dude, it's been amazing talking to you.
Thanks.
It's just so amazing. Like, after a bunch of years following your work, and maybe occasionally having a little Instagram chat, to actually get to really talk to you and hear about your story and your process and a lot of that kind of stuff. It really, I've got a lot more context, and I'm sure that anybody who has watched or listened to this point has really gotten a lot of great nuggets out of this as well. I know Daniel just bookmarked about 75 things on eBay. So
but they'll be here in 3 to 5 business days.
Exactly. Yeah. He bought the only other, 12-inch f4 lens from the 1850s.
It took me 5 minutes to find, but I got it.
Very expensive.
Yeah, all kidding aside, it's just fascinating. I'm always intrigued by people's process and what motivates them, and it's such a pleasure that you were able to take the time and share that and a whole lot more with us. So for those of you guys that are still there, make sure that you follow Giles Clement, and that's it. It's just Giles Clement on Instagram. I will absolutely put the links in there. You also need to buy some prints. The prints are very, very affordable, and I know you're doing a donation thing right now, so this is stuff that you guys are going to want to do as well, because it's for a good cause, and the prints are absolutely beautiful.
And when I'm dead, they'll be worth tons of money.
Tons of money. So get them while you can.
Tens of dollars.
Yeah, and if you're lucky, he might stain them with some of silver nitrate.
That's true.
Maybe. I mean, I can't guarantee anything.
Yep.
Yeah. So I guess we'll leave it there.
Cool.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you, Giles. It's been great. That's it for now. And we'll talk to you soon.